Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're starting today with some, well, pretty striking ideas we picked up from a recent live stream by Krzysztof Jackowski. Things like a sudden putsch, a sort of haste around presidential elections.
Right, a real sense of urgency.
And at the same time, talk of zakukani rush samolotoi.
Yeah.
Widespread air traffic chaos.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, what's the connection there? What could be causing all that globally?
Exactly. So that's the puzzle we're diving into.
We're looking at this live stream, which was delivered in Polish, laying out these, potential future scenarios.
And our goal isn't just to list them off.
No, definitely not. We want to really unpack them, see what connects these ideas, and maybe what they signal about the bigger picture. Looking for those deeper insights,
Okay, let's jump right in then. Geopolitics first.
That was good.
One thing that really stood out was about Russia and Ukraine, and specifically how Donald Trump might change his approach.
Oh, right. The idea he might shift focus.
Yeah, pivot away from that and maybe look more towards the Middle East. The force suggested it might be like to make up for feeling diplomatically outplayed by Putin.
That's an interesting angle. It suggests a kind of transactional foreign policy, maybe?
Transactional. How so?
Well, the idea that, a perceived loss in one area triggers a big move somewhere else. It feels less about long-term strategy and more reactive, perhaps.
Right. So if the U.S. suddenly focuses hard on the Middle East.
It could definitely stir things up there, amplify existing tensions, maybe create new issues.
And that seems to connect to another prediction, a pretty big one about Europe, specifically Germany.
Ah, yes, the idea of Germany potentially breaking away.
Exactly. Breaking from certain U.S. and EU policies, maybe even closing borders, requiring visas for some Schengen countries, which, for anyone listening, Schengen is usually about open borders.
It's a fundamental shift, yeah. So why might that happen? The source offers a few possibilities.
Like what?
Well, it could be linked to a feeling that the EU itself is weakening, maybe even starting to fracture.
Okay.
Or maybe Germany just trying to insulate itself, step back from wider EU problems.
But there was a more concerning reason suggested too, wasn't there?
Yes, perhaps the most significant one. The idea that Germany might be preparing for, or at least anticipating, more instability in Eastern Europe.
Involving Russia and Belarus.
Potentially. And in that scenario, closing borders suddenly looks more like a security measure.
Which leads straight into that potential Eastern European instability.
Right. The source flags Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Poland, Slovakia, Czech Republic, Romania.
As a potential intermediate zone if things escalate with Russia and Belarus.
Yeah. And the really worrying detail was about Polish refugees trying to get into Germany.
Only to find the borders closed. That just sounds bleak. What does that say about, European solidarity?
Well, it really highlights how fragile things might be if there's a major geopolitical shock, doesn't it?
It does.
The thought of a major player like Germany maybe putting its own security first, even with a humanitarian crisis next door. It raises some pretty deep questions about EU unity.
And just when you think that's enough to worry about, there's this prediction of a second global front opening up, maybe around July.
Yeah, on top of Ukraine and the situation in Israel, which is already ongoing.
A second front. I mean, it's hard to grasp the scale. Any thoughts on where that could even be based on current tensions?
Well, the source isn't specific, but you could point to areas already under pressure, couldn't you?
Like?
Maybe the South China Sea or, ongoing issues in parts of Africa. It's speculative, of course, but a major flare-up in places like that, especially if it pulls in big powers.
That could fit the description, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit to the economy.
Sure.
There was a point made, not really a vision, more like logical deduction, about gold.
Ah, the safe haven aspect.
Right. That gold will likely hold its value if faith in the U.S. dollar starts to wobble. That feels pretty standard for uncertain times, doesn't it?
It does. Gold is, it's tangible. It's historically held value when paper currencies, fiat currencies backed just by government say-so, start looking shaky.
So people flock to it.
Exactly. In times of instability, geopolitical or economic, trust can erode, and investors often look for that perceived security of gold. Demand goes up, price goes up. Makes sense.
But the predictions for Europe's economy were less optimistic.
Definitely more concerning.
A specific mention of a big financial downturn, high unemployment in the Netherlands, possibly spreading.
Right, with wider implications for Europe potentially.
And the reasoning given was interesting. that it might be linked to aligning too quickly or too closely with U.S. and EU economic policies.
Yeah, that perspective suggests maybe a critique of a one-size-fits-all approach.
How do you mean?
Well, the implication seems to be that the Netherlands, maybe other European countries too, by adopting these broader strategies perhaps prematurely.
They might be ignoring their own specific needs or vulnerabilities.
Exactly. Their own economic structures might not fit perfectly, leading to, well, negative outcomes down the line.
Okay. And following from that, there was this idea that Europe needs to sort of push back a bit, assert its own interests more.
Yeah, basically signal to the U.S. that maybe some obligations haven't been met and that Europe needs to think about its own priorities.
It hints at maybe rethinking the transatlantic relationship.
Could be.
So what would that assertion actually look like, practically speaking?
Oh, it could take different forms. Maybe Europe taking more independent stances on foreign policy issues, diverging from the U.S. sometimes.
And economically.
Economically, maybe forging new trade deals, perhaps looking beyond the usual U.S. framework, prioritizing European regulations. It points towards wanting more strategic autonomy.
Right. And a big part of that, according to the source, is Europe engaging directly with Asia.
Yes, bypassing intermediaries. The thinking seems clear. Asia's economic power and tech advancements are growing. You can't ignore that.
So what are the upsides and downsides of going direct like that?
Well, the upside is clear. Access to huge growth markets, new tech, maybe better trade terms if you cut out the middleman.
Makes sense.
But the challenge is, it requires a pretty big strategic shift. Building new diplomatic ties, new economic connections, that takes time and effort.
Okay. Now, amidst all this predicted economic turbulence, there was also a vision about people moving within Europe.
The migration aspect. Wow. From the Netherlands and Belgium, specifically.
Yeah, heading south towards Spain and Portugal during a deep crisis. Why might that happen?
Well, it's a pattern you sometimes see. People looking for places perceived as maybe more economically stable in that moment, or perhaps just a lower cost of living, maybe even a better climate when things are tough back home.
So Southern Europe might look more resilient.
Possibly. Different economic setups, different social safety nets. They might seem like a safer bet during a widespread crisis hitting the North harder.
Interesting. On a slightly more positive note, Switzerland was predicted to handle any crisis relatively well.
Right, attributed to its capital being heavily based in precious metals.
Which lets it kind of maintain its status quo financially. It definitely plays into that image of Switzerland as the stable financial hub.
And it comes back to what we said about gold. Precious metals are tangible stores of value.
Less prone to inflation or currency collapse.
Exactly. Switzerland's long-standing policy of holding big reserves gives it a solid financial foundation. It helps navigate storms better than countries relying mostly on, standard currency systems.
Okay, let's switch focus again. Domestic politics and how international events might influence them.
All right.
The source mentioned that putsch, again, that rushed feeling around upcoming presidential elections, specifically because of what's happening globally.
Yeah, that sense of urgency.
What does that suggest? That the stakes feel really high?
I think so. It probably reflects a feeling that, look, the world is changing fast, maybe getting more volatile, so who we choose as leader right now is critical.
Decisive leadership needed?
Seems to be the implication. That clear direction is essential to handle whatever challenges are coming.
And then there was this really intriguing phrase, Licytacja Polski, a Ukraini. A bidding for Poland and Ukraine.
Yeah, involving the future president, it sounds.
Like these countries become pawns or key strategic pieces.
More like key strategic pieces, I think. The idea could be that different major powers start making competing offers, security guarantees, economic aid, political alignment.
Each trying to pull Poland and Ukraine into their own sphere of influence.
Precisely. It suggests their geopolitical importance, especially in that East-West context, is just going to ramp up.
And this ties into something mentioned for the past, right? An older prediction.
Yes. Apparently from before the war in Ukraine, there was talk of Poland potentially being divided.
And something about a defense plan that seemed to treat Eastern Poland differently.
Right. That historical context definitely adds another layer of concern when you hear these current predictions about Poland's security.
It suggests these worries aren't entirely new.
No, it seems potential vulnerabilities or strategic questions about Poland's borders have been, well, on the radar for a while, according to the source.
Then there was that anecdote about President Duda waiting for Trump.
Yes. Highlighting that sort of intricate diplomatic dance.
Trying to figure out who influential figures might back or whose side they're on. especially thinking about the Polish election and these fears of influence?
Exactly. It shows how important those personal connections and perceived alliances are in international politics. Poland's likely trying to read the signals.
Figure out where U.S. policy might go and what that means for Poland's own security and position in Europe.
Makes sense, yeah. It's about strategic calculation.
And the takeaway on leadership for Poland, in the source's view.
Was that Poland needs someone not just, good with words, but decisive, patriotic, especially in turbulent times.
Right. Strong leadership needed for choppy waters.
Yeah.
What does decisive and patriotic mean here, though?
Well, decisive probably means able to make tough calls quickly, under pressure. Patriotic suggests prioritizing Poland's national interest and security above all else, navigating those tricky international relationships with a strong sense of national purpose.
Got it. Okay, let's cover a few other points that came up. There was a pretty disturbing vision about London.
Yes, a series of terror attacks leading to protests.
Sadly, that feels like an ongoing risk for major cities. What are the wider impacts of something like that?
Oh, they're profound, tragically. Beyond the immediate horror, attacks like that can really damage public trust. They can deepen social divides.
And lead to crackdowns.
Often, yeah. Increased security, maybe more surveillance, restrictions on liberties. And the mention of protests adds another layer potential for more social unrest, polarization.
Okay, and completely separately, there was prediction about major disruptions to air travel.
But not because of war or politics this time?
No, this is about problems with aircraft navigation systems, affecting lots of airlines, lots of flights.
That points to maybe technological vulnerabilities in, critical global infrastructure.
What could cause that kind of widespread failure?
Could be several things, really. Cyber attacks targeting those systems are a worry. Or maybe just widespread technical glitches in software or hardware, even disruptions to GPS or other satellite navigation.
Wow, the knock-on effects would be huge.
Yeah, massive. Logistically, economically. Stranded passengers, broken supply chains. Yeah.
Quickly then, Agenda 2030 was mentioned.
Right. The idea being that it's already happening and will probably continue, even if major powers face collapse.
It suggests it has real momentum. Why might that be?
Well, it suggests the drivers behind it. Climate change, inequality, sustainable development are maybe so deeply embedded now, pushed by so many different groups.
Like international bodies, governments, NGOs.
Exactly. That broad base gives it resilience, perhaps, even if the big geopolitical landscape shifts dramatically.
And then there were those more reflective bits.
Yeah, the comments on space photos being retouched, the nature of light in space.
And wondering if the soul perceives things like smell. Definitely more philosophical. Why include those, do you think?
Maybe just as a reminder of the bigger picture. Amidst all the geopolitics and economics, there's still reality, the cosmos, consciousness.
Puts things in perspective.
Perhaps. Or just encourages a more holistic view when you're thinking about the future and all these potential massive changes.
So putting it all together, this deep dive into Jackowski's stream paints a picture of, potential disruptions that are really interconnected.
Definitely. Geopolitical shifts, big economic challenges, domestic political changes. The source suggests they could all be linked, feeding into each other.
Right. These predictions, even if they are speculative.
They highlight potential weak spots, areas to watch across different fields, and that interconnectedness is key. A problem in one area could easily cascade and make things worse elsewhere.
Which brings us to the final thought, really, for you listening. When you hear about these potential futures, what stands out to you? What actions, what thoughts become more important in your own life?
Yeah. How might these ideas, speculative as they are, maybe shape how you see current events unfolding? Or the choices we all face?
It definitely encourages some critical thinking about what might be coming down the line.
And how it might affect us, our communities. Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into some really complex and definitely thought-provoking ideas.
Hope it gave you plenty to think about.
We hope it encourages you to keep questioning, keep learning, and keep engaging with the world around you.